Thank you all and welcome to our Composting Basics event with UW Recycling and UW Farm. We are so thrilled to have you all here on this pre-Earth Earth Month event. We're thrilled to have our host Audrey Tabor from UW Recycling and Andrew Stevenson Saki from UW Farm. We've got a fun-filled event with presentations from both parties so that you can learn a little bit more about our efforts here at UW to make this a greener place. So without any further ado, I'll turn things over to Audrey to get us going. Oh, sorry, one more note as we get started. We are going to be holding a Q&A. We'll ask that all questions be saved to the end. We've allotted some time to answer all of your basic composting and green questions here. So thank you.
Great.
Go ahead, Audrey.
Awesome. Thank you so much for providing this platform to us, Diana. We're excited to talk about compost, one of our favorite things. I will just get my slides up and going. Okay, and then I will go into presentation mode. And now I will change my share screen. Okay, can you see the title slide?
Yes.
Awesome. And there's no weird black boxes over anything. Okay, awesome, thank you. So yeah, this is Composting Basics with UW Recycling and UW Farm. Like Dana said, I am Audrey Tabor from UW Recycling, and then I have Adam Fain with me, also from UW Recycling, and we'll be co-presenting our slides today. First up, a little bit about UW Recycling. So we are a department within the Building Services Department under Facilities, and we manage waste services for the Seattle campus. So we administer the waste contracts. We also pick up waste with our own fleet of collection vehicles. We do outreach like this wonderful presentation. And we also are responsible for making sure that all waste infrastructure is up to date on campus. So making sure that everybody has access to compost and recycling containers. And to get things started, so why are we even talking about compost? Why is composting important to UW? And so there are four main reasons. The first being it's good for the environment, which we'll go into greater detail on later. Financially, the disposal costs for taking care of compost are less than half of the cost for taking care of garbage. So it saves the university money. It's also part of the university's culture. So UW has an executive order that states that the university must strive to be a model of environmental stewardship and sustainability and increase the reuse, recycling, and composting of these materials, including food waste. So it's literally written into our culture that we should care about composting. And then lastly, it's the law. So the city of Seattle has banned recyclable materials from the landfill. That includes paper and yard waste, cans, bottles, containers, and food waste. Additionally, we have the Washington Organics Law, House Bill 1799, which requires the diversion of organic materials away from the landfill and toward food rescue programs and also organics management facilities. So the state has a really ambitious goal of by 2030, cutting landfill disposed organic material by 75%. So both in the city and the state, there's a lot of efforts towards composting right now and food rescue. To give you some context about where we're at with composting on campus. So in 2018, we conducted a waste characterization study that looked at what actually is inside all of our garbage, recycling, and compost bins. And we know that out of all compostable food soil paper, so napkins, pizza boxes, things like that, 57% ends up in the garbage. And of all food that gets thrown away, 43% ends up in the garbage. So we know that compostable paper is our top priority, followed by food. And together, these stats guide our sustainability action plan goal of reducing the amount of waste we send to the landfill by 10% by 2025. So we know that we can reach that goal if we just get compost out of the garbage and into the compost bin. And now we'll pass to Adam to talk about the types of organic waste.
We kind of went over who we are and why we want to compost, but I'll just quickly go into some of the basics of composting and what we actually things are that we want to put in the compost bin. So if you're from Seattle, you're pretty familiar with this, but a lot of people aren't. So I always like to go over yard waste. So that includes anything from grass clippings to dried leaves to brush, small twigs, anything left over from yard work, basically. We also want to put our food waste in the compost bin. And that includes everything when you're cleaning up plates after a meal, all of that goes in the compost bin. And because we send all of our compost to a municipal facility, we can compost meat, bones, and dairy. You wouldn't want to compost that in your backyard bin. And I'll more on that in just a little bit. Another thing that I wanted to go over, not pictured here, is food soiled paper, which Audrey had mentioned earlier. The perfect example of that would be pizza boxes. Since it's made out of cardboard, a lot of people want to recycle that, but once it has like food residue and pizza grease on there, it's no longer recyclable, but it is compostable. Also, before we put all of our compostable material into the bins, we want to make sure that it is of good quality and that it's prepared. So if you have like a banana peel and it has a sticker on it, you want to remove that sticker. If you have one of those cucumbers that's wrapped in plastic, you want to take that plastic off first. That stuff doesn't degrade and won't turn into compost. It actually contaminates it. Also want to go over pet waste is not compostable. A lot of people try to put it in there anyway. And just because you put something, if the bag is compostable, you put something in there, doesn't mean it's going to be composted. So that is a contaminant. And if you have a pet fish, please don't also put that in the compost bin. So anything related to bodies, things like that. And lastly, some of this might be a little confusing. So you might be saying like, that's a lot of work. Why should I really care about this? And so the example we like to use is that picture in the upper right. Can anybody tell me what they think that picture is of? You can say it in the chat if you want. It was writing in the chat, so I'll just say it, that's fine. Those are carrots. And those are carrots. Yeah, there we go. Somebody got it. Those were carrots that were taken out of the landfill after 10 years. So when we send things to the landfill, they're just designed specifically to either not break down or break down very slowly. A lot of people think when you put food in the landfill, it just kind of breaks down naturally, and it doesn't. It just sits there. So if we compost this material after about 3 to 6 months, it turns into something that we can then use to grow more food out of. There we go. Also want to go over compostable packaging. So this includes all serviceware. So those compostable forks, compostable cups, things like that, compostable bags. And now this gets a little confusing too, because those cups look exactly like plastic. But that plastic is actually made from corn. It's a type of plastic called PLA, polylactic acid, and it's specifically made so that it breaks down in municipal composting systems. You wouldn't want to put that in your backyard bin, but since we send this stuff to Cedar Grove, it will break down and become compost. So I always tell people, since it can get a little confusing, the thing you really want to do is look at the label. It should say something like BPI certified or 100% compostable. If it doesn't say 100% compostable on there, it's okay to throw that material away. Recyclable products are not, compostable products are not recyclable. So when in doubt, find out. You can always ask us a question. But if you have to make that split-second decision, it's okay to go in the garbage. And so I go over those labels just because there are a lot of misconceptions. A lot of companies know that people want to do the right thing, and sustainability is a hot topic, and it's something that actually could increase sales. So people try to put these labels on there to make their products seem more sustainable when they actually aren't. So you'll see something like eco-friendly or biodegradable or made from plants. And that doesn't mean they're compostable. Biodegradable is a very big source of confusion because people's like, yeah, it's degradable. But biodegradable just means that a material breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. It doesn't mean it's going to turn into compost. And so this is how we get things like microplastics. So I'll quickly go over the history of composting also, now that you kind of know what it is. With composting, we know it's been used and used as like an amendment for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. We don't know exactly when and where it was started, but we do know that once we see the first evidence of farming, soon thereafter we see the first evidence of composting, because farming is pretty intensive, and so you have to give back to the land. And one of the first methods of composting that is standardized is the indoor method. And this is a method that was created over in India in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it was a way of layering a specific ratio of material in a heap and rotating it so that it gets air. And then eventually you would get a compostable product. And so from that, we created more modern methods of composting. So the Bakari method is something that uses that layering and that specific ratio of material, but they use machinery to turn it and aerate it. We also have windrow composting, which is basically you put all of that compostable material in a very long, like 100 feet long, 30 feet high row, and you manually turn it to aerate it. And this is great, but it is very labor intensive. So we also have the Beltsville process, which is a specific type of composting called aerated static pile composting. So you put that compostable material into a heap or a small windrow, and you use machinery to aerate it. And so this is great because it's a lot less manual labor, and it doesn't require a lot of machinery to aerate it. And so basically all modern forms of composting are variations of these three. Now, I kind of hinted that composting is done all over the world, but it really is. Those three are a lot of what we do here in the West. But we have instances of composting from Japan. If you actually look up Bokashi composting, it's a way of mixing your food scraps with germinated bran and basically fermenting your compost, which is a really cool process that you can actually do in your apartment. There's also a process where they layer specific ratios of compostable material, but treat it in a way that they actually get compostable material after 3 weeks. So every single form of composting has its own advantages, and it's really fascinating to learn, especially if you start learning more about it. So I can talk about composting all day long, I really can, but it's probably best if we actually kind of show you what Cedar Grove does, the local compost facility. Oh.
Escape.
Sorry about that.
Escape.
Into it. 1 second. Right here.
Yeah. So larger the screen.
All right, there we go.
Select the zoom at the bottom to the center. And then do share screen. Choose the Chrome window. Yeah. Go back to Chrome.
Okay. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Can we hear it?
We aren't hearing the sound.
Oh,
Yeah, I can share the video on my end because it was working for me previously. So let me go ahead and do that for you guys. Hello, hello. This is why we have tech, right?
yeah. Thank you, Diana.
Of course, we've got each other's backs here. We're making it all work. Okay, so it looks like the video that we are actually going to be doing is, can this move, please? Here we go. Yeah.
If you want to do 145
to 145?
Yeah, 145 to 545, so you don't have to watch the whole thing.
Okay, and please let me know if you can hear okay.
The truck now travels to the tipping building, the location where the waste is received. Part of our recipe is keeping a clean wood stockpile. Composting is an aerobic process, and as an aerobic process, we need to ensure there is airflow so that the microbes can have oxygen and breathe. We cannot compost 100% grass or 100% wood. Just like we need a healthy diet with a variety of food sources, we need a balanced carbon to nitrogen ratio to compost healthily. So one way to get that during grass season, for instance, is adding wood chips. The truck can dispel all the yard and food scraps into the huge pile that is ready for grinding. The receiving building has a negative air system, which removes air, and in doing so controls any odors that would be present. The air is then fed through a custom-made biofilter, which has a 90% odor elimination efficiency. The remaining material is now ready for step 4, grinding. The front loader picks material up, ensures a solid ratio of carbon to nitrogen, then puts the material into the grinder. The grinding process is very important as we have to reduce the material to a size that will still allow air to pass through it, which is imperative to successful composting. The ground material now gets added to a large conveyor belt, which will move the material to the next step in the process. Recycled water is added at this stage via sprayers. The moisture is a critical addition to the composting process. During this early part of the material's journey, a large magnet also removes any metal that might have wound up in people's yard waste bins, such as forks. The material travels along in an orderly fashion and finally reaches what we refer to as phase 1 of the composting organic process. As the material arrives, it is loaded onto a 164 feet long, 26 feet wide, 10 feet high heap of material. Once the heap has been built, it is covered with a gore cover fabric. The cover is very unique and consists of membrane laminate technology. It provides a biosphere that keeps the warm air inside, but allows the material to breathe. It keeps rain, sleet, and snow out, so it can handle the Pacific Northwest's climate well. The gore cover system at our Everett facility is one of the largest in the entire world. Of course, like the air we breathe, composting needs a certain amount of oxygen. A small 2.5 horsepower custom fan is added to the end of the gore cover system, which adds fresh air to the pile if the oxygen level falls below 8%. The goal is to keep the temperature inside at 165 to 170 Fahrenheit. This critical adding and removing of air is all monitored and tracked by a large computer system we call Comp Master Control. The process that we call Phase 1 will continually run between 21 to 28 days. The pile is covered throughout this time frame. As you can see, the cover becomes a massive blimp and represents air being added to the heap for the microbes to breathe. On day 28, we remove the cover. We now remove the material onto Phase 2, where the pile is newly created and further decays the composting organically. Phase 2 of the composting process takes another 14 days. Another 14 days passes, we're ready to move the pile to the third and final phase of the composting process. We need to get the moisture content and temperature down. We start drying the material. If it's too wet, it gets stuck to the screen. After the third phase, material is loaded in the hopper and moved to the screen. This final screening is important, as this is where plastics are removed from the pile. The final material that comes out of screening is the compost that we have created throughout this process. It's a beautiful product, dark, clean, earthy smelling, and a rich texture that anyone would want to put back into their yards or landscapes. Cedar Grove compost completes a local recycling loop and supports a sustainable local economy. The Cedar Grove front-end loaders then collect the compost material ready for either multiple deliveries or...
We can stop here.
Okay. Yeah, it kept going, so I thought, I'll let it finish up. And
Awesome.
of
Thanks
course,
so much for your support, Diana.
of course,
Zoom is always full of new surprises.
always.
Okay, we'll get back to our presentation. Okay, so with our remaining few minutes, we will talk about a few more subject areas, but one is composting at home. So how to get started with either collecting compost for your curbside bin or looking at starting your own compost bin in your backyard. Okay, so collecting compost in your kitchen. You don't have to have a fancy compost bin to get started with your compost journey. The picture on the bottom left is probably the fanciest compost bin I've ever seen, and it looks really nice. So you're welcome to purchase a nice looking compost bin, but really any bin, any lidded container will do. Remember to remove produce stickers. One of the pictures on the bottom right is our produce sticker sheet that we made, and the whole U shared for us. People can print out the sticker sheet and then load it up with all their produce stickers, and we got some excellent photos back from folks who used those produce sticker sheets. If you're worried about smell and flies from your compost or the mess, I recommend refrigerating or freezing your compost. It eliminates all odor if you put it in the freezer. The photo in the center is actually my compost, just a random vegetable container that we load up with our compost. And because odor is eliminated so well, our freezer actually tends to become completely full of compost until we can't use it for anything else. And then we empty it into a big container and take it out to our backyard bin. If you are worried about moisture collecting at the bottom of your bin, or mold growing, things like that, sprinkle a little baking soda at the bottom to help absorb moisture and also cut down on that odor. And then when it's time to take your compost out to your curbside bin, remember to either throw it away loose. You can carry it out and wrap it in newspaper. You're also welcome to throw it away in a paper bag or any approved compostable bag. Plastic bags are a big no, and sometimes there are even green plastic bags that people think are compostable bags, so make sure the bag says that it's actually compostable. And then as far as composting in your backyard, sometimes this can seem like a really intimidating thing to get into, but there are so many wonderful resources online. And now I am not an expert on the ratios of different types of material you need to get your compost going, or how often you should turn it, or how much air it needs, things like that. But I can direct you to some experts who definitely do know about this, and obviously the farm being one of those experts. But online, we have the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. They have a great webpage on how to get started with composting at home. They have webinars that go over all the basics and all sorts of resources. Also locally, we have the Tilth Alliance in Seattle, and they host in-person classes on composting with worms, or composting of all different types in your backyard, as well as how to grow different types of food on your own as well. They're an excellent organization. And then we also have the Seattle Public Utilities webpage, and they have an extensive amount of resources online. One of them being this composting yard and food waste at home guide that is very extensive and all different ideas on how to get started with composting at home. Just a reminder, if you're doing backyard composting, you do not want to put meat, dairy, or bones in most backyard composting processes. Bones will take a really long time to break down. And also those three groups of materials tend to attract rats and other vermin that you might not want visiting your compost pile. And then of course, compostable packaging. We've had people come up to us and say, yeah, I stuck my compostable cup in my backyard bin, and I checked a year later and it didn't break down. Like, this product can't actually be compostable. But As we learned in the Cedar Grove video, that's a really intense process that involves a lot of high heat, and that's how those compostable packaging materials are able to break down. So don't try and compost them in your own backyard compost pile. Last thing I'll say about this is that the photo in the middle is the compost bin that I use that's on the property that I live on. And my landlords are low and slow with compost. Like, we just dump our food into the bin. Sometimes they turn it, sometimes they add some lawn clippings to it, but in the end we end up with a really wonderful compost product after just a few months. I'm sure there are ways that you can be more efficient about how often you turn, or what you add to your compost bin, but it's really easy just to get started, and it's really fun just to do trial and error and see what happens. And we are running a little close on time, so we have 2 more quick sections. Adam will briefly touch on the impacts of compost.
Yeah, so the 2 things that we really want to try to hit home is that composting is great, not just for the individual and their home, but it's great for the environment in general. So when we're talking about greenhouse gases, basically, if you were to send something into the landfill, that stuff breaks down extremely slowly, and it produces methane, which is a far more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And so when we actually send that stuff to a composter, simply put, composting decreases methane production and increases carbon sequestration in the environment. So when you use that compost material to amend the topsoil layer, it actually keeps that stuff in the topsoil and then sequesters carbon inside, and also in the healthy plants that grow from it. And so environmentally, when we're talking about the topsoil layer, it does a lot of really great things. And so basically adds nutrients to that topsoil layer. And it also reduces erosion by keeping rain from running off into the waterway. So it mobilizes and helps degrade pollutants. It basically acts as a sponge, keeping pollutants from entering the waterway. Keeping pollutants from entering our waterways. And so it has immense environmental impact.
Awesome. And so our last little plug is, we talked about compost and how wonderful compost is and all the great benefits for yourself and for the environment. But we wanted to show this graphic, the food recovery hierarchy. So as you can see, compost is second from the bottom, only better than landfilling. Ideally, we really want to make sure that we are wasting less food, donating, and finding all different ways to creatively get food used before we ultimately send it to compost. Obviously, composting is better than sending food to the landfill, but there are many other ways that we can use leftover food before it goes to composting. And as part of that Washington organics law that I mentioned at the very beginning, part of those goals are to, by 2025, the amount of edible food wasted in landfill disposal must be reduced by 20%. So that's about 78,000 tons of good food that will need to be rescued for human consumption. So there are wonderful organizations out there, including our own food pantry, and the farm works really closely with the food pantry, as well as SaveTheFood.com, Food Too Good to Waste, Food Lifeline. These organizations are working on making sure that people protect their food from going to waste, and if they have excess food, that it gets to other people who can use it.
Last but not least, we are UW Recycling, so we love answering questions. We're going to answer questions here at the end, but we have a website that people can go to, and probably the greatest source on there is our disposal guide that goes over where to put your material. If you're ever wondering, we also have an Instagram if you want to keep up to date with our program and what we're up to. And we have an email address, recycle@uw.edu. It's super simple. Send us an email whenever you want. We also have 2 recycling courses, one for students, and the link to that is Yeah, just right there at the bottom. And we also have a bridge course for staff and faculty, and that's the QR code there if you're interested.
Awesome. And that is all we have for you today. And so we'll turn it over to Andrew to talk about what the farm is up to.
All right, thanks, Audrey and Adam. That was great. I'm going to basically pick up where they left off, in that I will be talking about some more of the specifics about how the UW farm is employing those tactics. So hopefully my screen sharing looks correct. All right, cool. So first of all, just introducing myself. My name is Andrew Stevenson Asaki. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator for the UW Botanic Gardens. I use he, him pronouns. And the UW Farm is a part of the larger kind of umbrella that is the Botanic Gardens. A little bit about the farm itself. The farm is a 1.5 acre student-powered organic urban farm and educational facility located on the University of Washington Seattle campus. The UW farm stands on the lands of the Coast Salish peoples, whose ancestors resided here since time immemorial. Many indigenous peoples thrive in this place, alive and strong. And talking about use of the land, and especially when it comes to producing food and regenerative processes, really important to acknowledge that. So first of all, where is the farm? You can find the farm in 3 different locations. First, our flagship location, the largest location, is at the Center for Urban Horticulture, which is where I'm seated right now. The farm is just to my left over there. It is the first location since the kind of initiation of the UW farm as a project itself. It was initially located near the botany greenhouses, but there was a campus sustainability fund that allowed the UW farm to reclaim some of this space over here at the Center for Urban Horticulture and really expand its process. Is the largest of the 3 locations that we've got. The next location is at Mercer Court. So this is nestled in the courtyards between the buildings. This is on the main campus itself. This is our second largest location, even though it's divided up between a number of courtyard spaces. It's also the location of the clubhouse, which is where a lot of the kind of the behind the scenes office work is happening. And our third location, the newest location, is McMahon Hall. It's also the smallest of the locations, but it's adjacent to the 8, which is one of the on-campus dining locations that the farm produce goes to. So about compost at the UW farm itself, there are 3 main composting programs that I'll be talking about with the UW farm. We'll be talking about leaves and grounds. We'll be talking about sending off to Cedar Grove and what it looks like when it comes back. And I'll be talking about the vermiculture facility that is our newest. And as I am the community outreach coordinator for all of the Botanic Gardens, I think that it would be great to hear from some of the UW farm people themselves in their own words, in their own natural environment. So I'm actually going to play a couple of videos of them walking you through some of their facilities and processes and talking about the work that they're doing. So I'm going to get out of my screen sharing, and Diana, if you want to kick us over to our first video.
To make sure our produce is nutrient rich, we apply a lot of compost that is all sourced locally. Leaves and coffee grounds from campus are turned into compost that we use. Thanks to Cedar Grove, Food and yard waste from Seattle residents and campus is also turned into compost that we use. We even receive compost from the Woodland Park Zoo.
Students, smiles, and supplies. Most UW Farm inputs are local. That local emphasis is even more true for UW Farm's output, our exceptionally fresh produce.
We don't grow food and then ship it across the country. Why? Because that model makes no sense. Instead, produce harvested at our farm is brought to the Douglas Research Conservatory, which is next to our main growing site. Here, students sort and package the produce. It's now ready for delivery, and you guessed it, we aren't traveling far.
Our produce goes to one of 3 places. It is purchased by the university and sold off the shelf or included as ingredients in dishes. It is picked up once a week by community members who participate in our CSA program. And it is dropped off at nearby food pantries, particularly the UW Food Pantry. We even have an electric bike to help with deliveries. How cool is that?
Once the harvest is complete and the growing plots are cleared, we plant cover crops. This step is often overlooked. Cover crops sequester carbon from the atmosphere and enrich the soil for the next growing cycle.
At the UW Farm, we're always looking ahead and thinking about how to reduce our environmental impact while striving to serve as a model for our community. If you want to learn more about sustainable urban farming, you know where to find us.
All right, great. So I got a couple more videos that I'm going to show. The next one is going to be talking about that Leaves and Grounds program. So basically that is getting the coffee grounds from the coffee shops on campus, as well as the leaves from the UW grounds folks. And yeah, I'll let the video speak for itself. Thanks, Diana.
Hey everybody, we're back here at the UW Farm. Today we're going to talk about our leaf compost pile. This was funded by the Campus Sustainability Fund, and it is composed of tree leaves and coffee grounds from the roasteries on campus. So here's the pile in the making. This has been assembled over the course of this year. Let's look at some of the different parts of it. You can see we've got paper coffee filters, which will break down pretty nicely. There's tree leaves in here, clumps of tree leaves. There's actually a mushroom growing out of this one, which is pretty cool. And we've got clumps of coffee grounds. So when you're making a compost pile, we often talk about greens and browns, or carbon and nitrogen ratios. So carbon-rich materials are often called the browns. These are things like wood chips, leaves. And then nitrogen-rich materials are things that we call the greens. So things like coffee grounds, although they're not green, waste from weeds, crop residue, that kind of stuff that has just recently been living. So you may not be able to see this, and I wish you could feel it, but as I dig deeper into this pile, it is getting extremely hot. It's so hot that I can't keep my hand in there for very long, because that is just the heat of all of the organisms inside the pile breaking down everything. Here comes Perry. Gonna dig it open a little bit more with the shovel, so maybe you can see all the steam coming out. On a cold day or in the morning, you can really see these piles steaming a lot. Compost piles, the ideal temperature is around 130 or 140 degrees, but they can get...
Here we...
Did you want me to play the next video as well?
Yeah, you can go ahead to our third
this
and final
is like
video.
ladybug larvae.
Yeah, not this
We
one.
are back at the UW
video. We'll be playing the next video, which is compost from Cedar Grove.
Yep.
Yep.
Thanks, Diana.
Of course.
Here we are, shoveling compost into wheelbarrows to be put onto our vegetable beds. This is beautiful compost from Cedar Grove, which handles all of the municipal yard waste and vegetable waste from our kitchens. You can see all the amazing living things in this compost pile.
That's hot.
Yeah, it's steaming. You may not be able to see the steam, but the inside of the pile is really warm, and that's just the heat of all of the living things, bacteria, fungi, other larger decomposers that you can see with your eyes, that are all working together to break down the organic material in this pile. You might even be able to see in this the little white dots that are probably
trying to
fungi.
Yeah, they're breaking down a little twig, which is super high in carbon. And these were within the middle of the pile. And as I was shoveling, all of a sudden a mound cracked open and there was heat or steam coming out. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is alive and living with bacteria, which then when we put it on the beds where we're gonna grow carrots, it's gonna interact with what's in the soil, and the bacteria are gonna also then transfer and work in the soil to make minerals and essential elements available to the plants that we're gonna grow. Super cool.
Yeah.
Anything else, Adam?
That is it.
That's it for today's video on compost. Later we'll talk about the UW made compost, which is leaves and coffee grounds.
All right.
You can iron your clothes.
We are not sponsored by whoever that is. Thank you for helping out with that tech. I'm going to switch back over to our slides here. All right, so going back a little bit about the coffee and leaves. So I wanted to let Perry and her team talk about it because, as you can see, the enthusiasm about dirt just really comes through when Perry's talking about compost, and I think it's really great. So the coffee and leaves program it's really great because, like they were saying, it helps kind of find that balance of the carbon and the nitrogen in the compost piles. And it's also right here taking some of that compost from the on-campus collection of compost and other, away from the waste collection in general. And so we can handle it right here in-house. So here you can see kind of the compost pile itself, and then the compost as it's been spread out on, here it's a patch of fava beans and peas that are really positively impacted by the nutrients from the compost. All right, and that was Perry getting excited about compost. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is vermicompost. And this is our newest facility and process. And because of such, we don't have a video to share about it, so I'll be telling you about it. So vermiculture is literally just using worms as an important part of that composting process. Specifically here at the UW farm, we're working with red wigglers, which are really fantastic. You can see them on the image to the right, breaking down a leaf of lettuce. And they're pretty incredible little creatures. They can break down 20% of their body weight worth of waste every day. And they are currently in our new facility, which I believe is another Campus Sustainability Fund funded project. They are getting fed waste from the wash pack process that we talked about a little bit as the processing the produce for being sent out to those different locations. And also the events that we have at the CUH location, including the pizza bakes, though that will be expanding as more construction is happening to expand the space for hosting events. We're going to be opening a cultural kitchen there in the next couple years. So there'll be even more space for events such as that. At its peak, this facility will be able to produce up to 100 pounds of compost every week. And a really important part of this, and is also shared with the leaves and coffee grounds process, is that we're able to handle this composting and take care of this waste on site and do so locally. So Cedar Grove is really great, and we still get a lot of our compost from them and send off a lot of our compost or compostable waste to them. And also, the less that we are traveling and transporting that compost, the smaller our carbon footprint from emissions will be. And it just increases our capacity to be able to handle this ourselves. And probably I think what we all want to see more about is, well, what can we learn about it? And a really important part of the Botanic Gardens and the UW Farm is not just doing these things, but bring everybody else into it. So we have a lot of educational opportunities here. This is some signage that has been made and will be going up at the vermicomposting facility, talking about what's happening here, who's doing this work, and learning a little bit about the composting process itself. As you can see, there's a couple of really great things added on here, including that QR code to help for people who are wanting to learn more using their phone that's available. And even up here on the top, next to the title there, these are being produced to have Braille on them so that it is more accessible for low vision and blind folks, which is a really big part of what the UW Farm is working on, making this type of learning accessible to more folks. We also have programming that is not just that kind of passive as people are coming onto the open space that is the UW Farm, but specifically having programming for all ages and creating materials to teach folks about that. And these are really great resources that I'm happy to share. They're open and available on the UW Farm website. Learning more about who these worms are, what they do, but also learning about what vermicompost, vermiculture can really take care of, and what to avoid as folks are doing this on their own. And I think these are just really beautiful, really great images and resources for folks. And that brings me to our final pitch, which is if you would like to learn more or get involved, we don't have a nice, concise website like UW Recycling does, unfortunately. So if you want to find us online, it might be easier to head over to our Instagram, which is just instagram.com/UW-Farm, or email us uwfarm@uw.edu. I can also share out, like I said, some of those websites in the chat as we move to our questions. And we are at, I think, time for questions.
Yes, we are. Thank you both so much. Let me go ahead and add a spotlight so that you two are featured. Feel free to add your questions in the chat or speak them out loud, but I am going to just go to the top and moderate some of the questions that came in earlier. A question from Diana. Her department purchases sleeves of compostable cups for events. The cups are compostable, but is the plastic bag/wrap in it that it comes in compostable? Oh.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, it depends on where you get it from. I would probably say the answer is usually no. But the company will usually tell you and look for a compostable on the bag. But here at the UW, we have a way of departments actually to recycle plastic film as long as it passes the stretch test. So if you do have any questions about that, definitely shoot us an email.
Great. Another question in the QA box that came in was, does dairy include eggshells if they are compostable?
That's a good question. And I know we said no bones, meat, or eggs. I think no bones, meat, or dairy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that eggshells add a lot of really valuable nutrients to compost, actually. I wouldn't like crack an egg open and put the egg itself in your compost because that might result in the, attracting vermin issue. But I think the clean eggshells are fine for backyard composting. I don't hold me to that though. What do you think, Adam?
We did use eggshells in our backyard composting. And it actually, it produced some really healthy plants. That's just backyard composting. They're fine to be put in your composting that ends up at Cedar Grove.
Fantastic. Can you talk about which weeds to avoid in home composting?
Yeah, my knowledge on that is it's recommended you don't use noxious weeds in your home compost pile. So any weeds that are listed on your county's webpage as, you're not allowed to plant these particular plants like Himalayan blackberry or knotweed, things like that. Those are really pervasive plants that will find a way to exist even if they are baked thoroughly in your compost pile. So I don't think you should put any noxious weeds or like invasive plants that are really aggressive into your compost bin because they might not be fully, you know, dead at the end of the compost process.
Oh, very valuable information.
And Liz just dropped a link on kingcountyweeds.com, and I think that link should have the answer to Diana's follow-up question of should you put those plants in the landfill? I believe the answer is yes, but definitely check out that link.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
I've seen some chatter about non-native earthworms in the North American environment. Is this a real thing? And if so, are there worms that should or should not be used in vermiculture?
So I will admit ignorance to some of this, at least to the extent of it. What I can say is that the worms that were chosen, the red wigglers, were specifically chosen for by the UW Farm team to be in this vermiculture facility, as opposed to earthworms, which are also really great, but aren't going to be as necessarily as effective in this type of facility. But I don't know more than that, and I'm not sure, Audrey and Adam, if you know any more about that, but I think that's super interesting, and now I'm going to have to do some Googling on my lunch break, so thanks for that.
Yeah, that's basically the extent that I know. I believe there's like 1 or 2 species of earthworms that are native that are used within the vermiculture systems. But I think a lot of the ones that are most effective probably aren't native. But oh, looks like somebody put that in the chat also. That they have red wigglers, but yeah, basically at this point, red wigglers and a lot of those vermiculture worms are in the ecosystem anyway now, so we can't really do much about that at this point.
Yeah, very interesting stuff there. Thank you for speaking on that. I finally got my parents to use the yard waste more, but now they throw in disposable tissues like Kleenex. Are tissues actually compostable or only paper towel or paper napkins and paper towels?
That's a really good question. So I mentioned earlier, anything related to the body is not going to be compostable. So if you blow your nose and you get bodily fluids in a tissue, or if you clean up a scrape, we don't want to compost that material because compost is then used to grow more food. So there's certain health risks that we want to try to avoid with that. But if you have like a paper towel or even a tissue and you like spill barbecue sauce on the counter and you wipe it up, that's great to be composted.
Mm-hmm. It looks like the question also was about whether or not Kleenex actually have like plastic in them. And that is a good question. I've never thought about plastic fibers being used in personal hygiene products like that, like toilet paper or tissues. However, I would be surprised if they have started using poly in them. Definitely check the label. But they technically, if you blow your nose in a paper towel or tissue, it technically would, become a compost product. If you put it into your compost bin, it's more a matter of safety for the people that are handling the waste after you put it in the bin and handling it at the processing facility, things like that. Cedar Grove has mentioned that they'll get emails from people asking if they can put like roadkill or very interesting things in their compost bins. And it's technically, yes, it will compost, but it's a matter of whether or not you want it to be part of the process. So.
Oh yeah. A question further up, what do you think of tabletop composting machines? Do they really work, or are they all just hype?
That is a really good question. I know of like one or two. I think one is called Lomi, that I've heard good things about. I've never used them personally. Um, and just from what I've heard, they produce like good compostable material in a short amount of time. They're pretty expensive though, so that I don't think they're accessible to everybody, and a lot of people don't have room for those types of things. So I mean, if you live in Seattle, it's super easy. You just bring your compost to the bin that's collected by the city. But if you're outside of Seattle, I would say some of those things might be more advantageous to people that don't have municipal composting facilities. So it's definitely something to look into, I would say.
Fantastic. Thank you for that answer. We do have some space for any other questions. Liz made a good point about tea bags, with some tea bags having plastic fibers in the bag, and being mindful of which tea bags can be composted. So thank you for sharing that point. All right.
I mentioned that I was going to share some resources, so I'll do that now so people have a chance to grab it in the chat. And I also will mention that in the video, it talked a little bit about Zoodoo. I'm not sure how familiar folks are with Zoodoo out of the Woodland Park Zoo, but it's a really great and just kind of funny program that they've got where they're literally taking animal waste, and then they have their own composting facility, and you can get it in big and small, I was going to say doses, that feels wrong to say, sizes, either by the bucket or the truckload. Yeah, that program is up and running now, so you can get your compost from the zoo.
So cool. I love that.
That's really neat. And I know I have some resources that I'd love to share from our slides as well. Will it be possible to send like a follow-up to attendees, Diana?
Yes, I was just going to make that point. We will be sending a follow-up with the slides to all registrants, so you'll be able to access this information. The recording will actually be sent out at the end of the month when we do our information, when we send out our monthly YouTube subscriber, where we send out our monthly YouTube videos. There was one more question here about the Zoodoo. Can you explain how Zoodoo is different from Cedar Grove in regards to not putting dog waste in Cedar Grove compost bins?
I am not a Zoodoo expert, unfortunately. I've toured their facility once. Audrey, look like you might have better information.
This is also a very like not precise answer, but from what I know, and Adam can fill in too, like the bacteria and things, other living things inside dog waste, like carnivorous animal waste, is different than what is in like, ungulate waste. So like, we have horses on our property, and that's, perfectly fine to use in our compost. And I imagine that Zoodoo also comes from like elephants and giraffes and other like hooved animals, but I think that is part of it. Do you know any additional info, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say like Zoodoo is specifically meant for animal waste. It's kind of like what the whole process is based around. Cedar Grove is not set up specifically for animal waste, and so that's specifically a product that they want to avoid. So that's another main difference.
Yeah, and definitely somebody else added that you can also do like human manuring or composting, like the Loop Biosolids project in the King County. You see those really pretty Loop trucks, they're probably full of human waste. And that's a whole other process entirely. So
I'll just add, for those super interested in that, there are different licenses for different types of composting facilities, and Cedar Grove has a different type of license than the zoo has. That I think has a big impact, and just Cedar Grove's ability to sell compost that has certain things in it back to consumers.
Fascinating. So many ways to compost. It's fantastic.
Mhm.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for this incredible workshop and all the great information. Again, we will be sending out the slide decks and encourage you all to stay connected during Earth Month. So both UW Recycling, UW Farm, and UW Sustainability have a number of fun events coming up. I'll send that in the email. We also encourage you to take part in our 30-day sustainability challenge. With compost being one of the challenge days, you will definitely get a leg up. All the attendees here will get a leg up on that day. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.